Hey, what's up? Nick Frosty here, and welcome to this tutorial. So, in this tutorial, we're going to start creating a member system. Now, first off, we're going to work on the login, and then the registration, then email activation, and even a forgot password page. So, generally, when I make a member system, I always start with the login because it's always the easiest, and then moving along, fixing everything up as we go. So, I have the login file created. It's just a very simple HTML file right here. And yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our database table. Now, you will need access to a database admin panel, I guess. In this case, I'm going to be using phpMyAdmin. So I'm going to create a user tab. Whoops. So I'm going to create a users table with 7 fields. Now, our first field is going to be an ID. Next, we're going to have a username. Next, we're going to have a password. And then an email. And then we are going to have an active. And this is so we can set users to active or not. And then we're going to have a code and a date. So what we want to do is we want to set our ID to a big int, and the reason for that is so that we can have lots and lots of members in the database on your website. And then you want to scroll over and you want to check the auto increment box, and you want to set the index to primary. Scroll back over, and our username is going to be a varchar of, well, let's go with 50 characters. Our password is also going to be a varchar of 50 characters. Email is going to be a varchar of 250 characters, and that's because some people do, for whatever reason, have very long emails, which I think is not very smart. So our active variable, our active field, is going to be a Boolean type. Now, if you don't know what Boolean means, you might have seen it as bool, so that's the shorthand version, but Boolean essentially means true or false, and that's what it means in the world of programming. Our code is going to be a varchar of 25 characters, and that is because that's going to be our activation code. Now, our date is just going to be the date that the user registers, and I'm just going to set that to 50 characters. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and we have our table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert some dummy information. So I'm going to create a user for myself. And for now, our password isn't going to have any encryption, and we'll get to that later. And we'll make it have MD5 encryption with some salt to make it extra strong. And then the email, I'm just going to use admin@nickfrosty.com. My active, I'm going to set to 0. Code is just going to be 12345, and the date is February 14th, 2011. So I'm going to hit go, and we have our information inserted. So we have our first user in the database. Pretty simple. So what we're going to start on now is our actual login system. Now, we're going to be doing session-based login systems. So at the top of every page that you want to be able to use your users to be able to log into, say if there is a member-only page or whatever, you are going to need this code at the top of every page that you want to be able to do that. So we have to be able to set our session_start. So we want to start our session because we're going to be doing a session-based login system. Now, inside of our body area, we're going to create a PHP code block, and we're going to create a form variable. Now, our form variable is essentially going to be the normal HTML code that we would have, except it's just going to be in a variable, so we can display it very easily in any spot we want. So we're going to set an action attribute on our form, and the action attribute on a form is essentially telling the form where it's going to submit and send all the information from the form, so what file it's going to send it to. So in this case, it's going to be our login.php file. Now we also need to set a method attribute, and the method attribute simply declares whether or not we want to have a get variable. So right here, this right here is a get variable. So we have token equals and then all that. So that would be our get variable. Now we want to set this to post so it doesn't show any of the user's sensitive information in the URL. So after that, I'm going to go ahead and create a table, and the reason for that is just to make everything look kind of nice. So inside of our table, we're going to have a TR or a row. And inside of our row, we're going to have a TD or a column. We're actually going to have two columns. Our first one is just going to say our text, and it's just going to say username. And the next one is going to be our text box, our input box. So we need to put an input tag with a type attribute of text. Now, there are many different type attributes you can use. You could use text, password, button, submit, checkbox, radio. There's a bunch of them. So a text attribute or a text type simply says that we want to have a text box. Now, the password attribute or value, sorry, the password attribute. Said it again. The password value says that we want to have a text box, but we want to hide all that information that's going to be in there. Alright, so then we want to set a name attribute, and it's pretty self-explanatory to what that is. And our name is just going to be user. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to change this to password, so we're going to have our password field. So we have our password field. And then we're going to have our submit. And the submit type essentially means that we want to have a button there. Now, you could have a button, like you could set the value to button, but that'll create the button. But it won't do anything when you click on it because it's just a button there. But we want to be able to actually submit our information, so we have to set the type to submit. Now, I'm going to set the name of this to login button, and I'm going to set the value to login. So after setting that, what we want to come to do is we want to come down here, and now is where we get to the real PHP code. So what we want to do first is we want to see if the login button has been actually pressed. So we want to create an if statement with an else that is just going to echo our form variable. And the if statement is going to say if $_post, and then we have standard brackets, and inside of here we have login button. So that's essentially saying if the login button has been pressed, then we want to do whatever is in here. But if it hasn't been pressed or clicked, then we just want to show the form. So that's why we created the form variable, so we can make it really easy to use in this way. Alright, so inside of here, what we want to do is we want to get the username. So user equals $_post. And the reason we're using the _post value right there is because our method is set to post. And you must be very careful. This post must be in all caps, so capital P, capital O, capital S, and capital T. Then we want to set, inside of here, is the name of our field, in this case user. So that'll get our username. Then we have our password. So we've gotten our password. So we're going to put in an if statement now, and we want to check to make sure that the user has actually entered in their password and their username. So we're going to check for username first, so we're just going to say if user. So if the user variable is found with information in it, then we can actually continue on because username has been provided. So if it hasn't been provided, we're going to say you must enter your username, and then we want to have our form variable, just like that. Then inside of here, we want to do the same thing, but we want to do our if statement with our password variable. And then inside of here, we'll say you must enter your password, and then our form variable. So I'm now going to put in an echo here saying info found. Now actually, instead we will just echo out the user and the password followed by a horizontal line and our form. So if we refresh the page, you can see we have this error right here of undefined index, and I will explain that in a second. So we have our form here. If we go ahead and click login, you can see my username is root and my password is password. Now I can change this to password12, hit login, and we have it set to password12. Alright, so the reason we're getting that error is because the undefined index error is a server configuration setup where certain variables or certain errors are displayed if variables aren't found initially and don't have a value. So to be able to fix that, you want to scroll to the top of the page right above our session_start, and you want to put in this line of code. So this line of code is error_reporting, and then we have parentheses, and then inside of it in all caps we have E_all, and then we have caret, which is shift 6 on your keyboard, and then E_notice. So if I save that and simply refresh the page, and we don't want to resubmit, we want to reload, and after that it gets rid of the error. So just go back to the login page. So we don't have that error anymore, which is good. So inside of this area right here is where we want to be able to connect to our database and check to see if the username is found in the database with the correct password, and if it is, then we want to actually log the user in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new PHP file, and it's going to be a bare minimum file here, and I'm going to name it to connect.php, and this file is going to allow us to easily connect to our database with all our information. So I'm going to call two functions, MySQL_connect, and the MySQL connect function takes 3 parameters. Now a parameter is essentially a piece of information that like a function takes. So our first parameter is our server name that we want to connect to. In this case, I'm using localhost. Now the next parameter is our password for our database, and mine is just root, and my password is password. And by all means, do not actually set your password to password if you're running on a live server, because that would just be idiotic. So after that, we want to select our database table. So we want to say MySQL_select_DB, and that will allow us to select our database table. Now if we go back to phpMyAdmin, you can see that my database table is named tutorials. So just type that in there. So this code right here will just allow us to connect to our database and then run queries to be able to get and set information in our database. So I'm going to go ahead and close that connect file now, and you can see that we have it inside of here. All of these files are pretty much empty actually as of right now, and they won't be for long though. So inside of this area right here is we want to require, and we want to require our connect.php file, and that is essentially just letting us connect to the database. And then we want to disconnect to the database from the database rather, so that we don't leave a live connection open so that hackers can alter your database and get information out of it. You want to make sure you close your connection just by calling that function right there. So inside of here we need to run our query, and we're going to store this query in a query variable. So we want to call the MySQL_query function, and inside of here is where we're going to have our actual query. So before we do this, we need to create our encrypted password. So password equals MD5 and then password. So this right here just creates a simple encrypted password using MD5 encryption, but this is really, really weak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to double encryption, and as an added bonus, inside of here, so I have 2 double quotation marks and then a period, meaning that I want to concatenate information onto here. And what this will allow us to do is have a more secure password, and this is called salt. And salt is when you add your own information to password hashes to make them a lot more secure. So I'm just going to set this as, I don't know, something random. And that's what you want to do. You want to set it as something random with random capitalization and some numbers and all kinds of random stuff in there. Don't forget to check out my website, follow me on Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube.